The Spartans were the most feared military force in the Greek world, earning legendary status in their wars against Persia. But how they got so powerful is anything but pretty. For example, when a Spartan baby was born, the elders would immediately put it through an utterly disturbing test. Sparta was considered a warrior society, and most of its citizens were trained as such. But a warrior society meant their freedoms had limits, and their expectations were grim. While Athens was centered around impressive buildings and architecture, Sparta was said to have a wall of men instead of bricks. The Spartan lifestyle was totally opposite to that in Athens, where culture was celebrated and opportunities were awarded to their citizens. In Sparta, life was strictly regimented and basic, with no luxuries. Spartans didn't have nice or even comfortable clothing. They dressed in ragged clothes made from coarse materials, and their meals consisted mostly of porridge and black soup made with pig's blood. Sometimes Athenian people would joke that they understood why Spartans were so eager to die in battle. The main focus in Sparta was battle. Everyone was expected to either be ready for battle or be preparing for battle, including infants. If a baby was deemed healthy by the elders, and more on that disturbing test later, the baby was then given a set amount of time to mature at home before it was considered ready for training. But they weren't given as much time as you might think. Spartan boys were taken from their mothers at the age of 7, and they were then moved into barracks with groups of other boys and taught to be men. And this specific training was referred to as the agoge regime. The boys were split into 3 age groups, the first from 7 to 12, and then from 12 to 20, and from 20 to 30. These groups were referred to as companies. Each company was trained to be intensely competitive, and they were encouraged to use violence against each other. Any newly joined boys were forced to play brutal games led by older boys, as a type of initiation. Often, this included walking barefoot for the entire winter. They were ritually beaten in a temple devoted to the goddess of the hunt. The boys were taught to willingly accept the torturous rituals, as these were seen as honorable. Spartan training, no matter what form it took, was often cruel and torturous. For example, the boys were regularly left hungry and forced to resort to stealing food. And this was done with the hope that the desperation would teach them to develop resourcefulness. However, it was more than just an exercise in survival. Stealing food was a test. If they were stealthy enough to get away with the theft, the wardens actually rewarded their behavior. But if they were caught, they had failed and so would be whipped. Physical punishment was used to teach them how to endure hardship. Their strict disciplines emphasized survival training, overcoming obstacles, and fending for themselves in hostile territory, which is why they were usually left with minimal clothing, not enough food, and often abandoned without shelter. Those who did well under these circumstances were made leaders. At various stages, they were trained in pain tolerance, hunting, dancing, singing, and rhetoric, or the art of persuasion. But when it came to academics, the Spartan boys were taught very little. While they were taught basic reading skills, any other learning was strictly forbidden. The view was that traditional education would make the boys weak. By the time Spartan boys reached 18, they were trained in combat. By age 20, they were considered adults and moved into permanent barrack-style living quarters, where they would live and dine with a large group of other men. And although they could marry at any time, they were required to continue living with the other men. Relationships among the men were complicated. It is widely believed that many of the men would commit violent acts against each other, including various forms of forced intimacy. Laying with other men was common in ancient Sparta. It is said that these intimate relations created strong emotional bonds with one another, helping them stay united on the battlefield. thus making them better warriors. All in all, Spartan warriors were loyal, fierce, and unforgiving. And they were expected to remember that, and they did. Spartan warriors took their job very seriously. At the height of Sparta's power, between the 6th and 4th centuries BC, other Greeks commonly accepted that one Spartan was worth several men of any other state. Their manpower was unmatched, and they believed their strict and sometimes fierce training methods played a huge role in this success. The Spartans had an annual festival called the Diamastagosis, which was a brutal public display. The boys were taken in front of a large crowd and whipped until they couldn't stand it anymore. While it may sound like torture, Spartans believed it to be a great honor and would actually and eagerly volunteer for a spot. The boys of various ages wanted nothing more than to prove that they could withstand the brutal treatment for longer than any other person. This festival became a spectacle, drawing in Roman visitors wanting to watch the horrific torture as entertainment. They even profited from the event by selling tickets and merchandise. And sadly, it wasn't the only harrowing event. Another event at this festival involved a block of cheese that was placed upon an altar to the god Artemis. They would then have a group of starved trainees who they would set free, and the desperately hungry men would fight each other to grab as much cheese as they could get their hands on. But their battle wasn't only with each other. This may come as no surprise, but during these Hunger Games, the starving young men were also whipped and beaten by the older men, sometimes to their death. Not only that, they were expected to smile and keep strong faces as they maimed each other while fighting for crumbs of cheese, all as crowds of people watched and cheered. Age 30 is when things would change once again for Spartan men. At this age, they were elected to citizenship. As long as they met 3 conditions, they had to have been born a Spartan, fulfilled their required training, and participated in the dining groups. If all conditions were met, these men would become Spartan citizens. This meant their training had ended. They were no longer starved, beaten, and abandoned. They were now official warriors, and their job was to protect. Spartan girls, on the other hand, had a less brutal upbringing. They were raised with the main goal of having children. Because of this, they were treated well. They were well nourished, unlike the boys, and encouraged to exercise. And actually, they were supposed to remain nearly as fit as a Spartan man. Spartan women were said to have more freedom and rights than other Greek women of that time. The women were considered of high importance, so much so that a Spartan marriage was matrilocal, a custom where the husband lives with the wife's community. This means the Spartan community belonged to the women, and the men served for their well-being. Spartan women exercised regularly and trained in various sports that were said to help them undergo the pains of childbearing, since that was their life mission. But they also took part in some strange dancing rituals. Spartan women held competitions where they would perform gymnastic routines for groups of men while completely unclothed. Sometimes this even included wrestling. In Sparta, marriage was a peculiar event. It didn't include a special ceremony, like in Athens. Instead, the Spartan women would be willfully captured by their grooms and taken away to a faraway cabin in the middle of the night. During this marriage ritual, the woman was dressed in men's clothing. They would cut her hair short to resemble a man. Then, she was laid down on a bed of pallets, and the groom would lay with her. When he was finished, he would simply get up and return to his barracks to sleep with the other men, while his bride wandered home alone. For Spartans, marriage served only one purpose: to produce children. The men were allowed to marry whenever they wanted to. There was no set age. However, many of them were in their early 20s, when they were believed to be of a prime age for physical health, and this was to ensure excellent offspring. But childless men and women were not well received, and measures would be taken to ensure they reproduced. If a married Spartan woman was childless, the government would force her to find another man who could do a better job at impregnating her. Similarly, a childless man could request another man's wife if she had previously borne strong children. But if an older Spartan man wanted more children with his wife, he would choose another man who was in his prime to lay with his wife instead, once again ensuring ideal offspring. Many Spartan children were products of inbreeding. Spartan king Leonidas, the main character in the film 300, was the product of an uncle-niece marriage. His wife Gorgo, being the daughter of his half-brother, was also his niece. Spartan society took their reputations very seriously, sometimes a little too seriously. In Sparta, strength was admired and weakness was despised. The greatest virtue was bravery, and the greatest honor was to die in battle. In fact, the worst crime for a Spartan was to flee from battle. They had to return victorious or dead. Mothers would give their sons a shield and tell them, "Bring back this shield or be brought back on it," a reference to how fallen warriors were brought home. If a warrior still had his shield, he was considered victorious. Greek historians have described how soldiers lost in battle were celebrated, while the men who survived often looked depressed. Men who returned from battle were ostracized if they were seen smiling afterward. They actually would prefer the man to die with honor than to return to fight another day. Because of this, many surviving warriors resorted to unthinkable acts to save face. After the Battle of Thermopylae, when the Persians defeated the Spartans, the only two surviving warriors were so humiliated that they took their own lives on their way back to Sparta. The Spartan warriors were taught to fear failure. There's one old Spartan tale that depicts how serious this was, and it's gruesome. It's the story of the Spartan and the fox. It is said to be a true tale about a young Spartan boy who had stolen a fox, but he had to get away with the crime in order to be truly successful. So he hid the fox under his jacket and did everything he could to keep it from being discovered. Sadly, his plan took a very dark turn. The panicked fox chewed its way through the young boy's body, painfully taking his life. But the boy's demise was considered as something honorable. Sparta was unusual in that it had not one, but two kings ruling at the same time. The two kings of the Augid and Eurypontid families were equal in authority, meaning one could not act against the other. Their duties were mainly religious, judicial, and military. While they had restrictions on many political issues, they had seemingly unlimited powers when it came to military action. The kings of Sparta were judged as civilians and held to the same laws of the community. This is vastly different from most historical monarchs who often enjoyed lifestyles and powers similar to those of an all-powerful overlord. One king was said to rule from home, while the other often traveled with the warriors into battle. During the Persian War, the two Spartan kings were Leonidas and Leotychidus, and they led Sparta into many successful battles in a bid for supremacy over the ancient world. For a while, Sparta fought the Greek cities of Athens and Thebes, as well as the Persian Empire, gaining more and more naval power as they went. And with the immensely strong and loyal army that they had carefully built, they conquered their rivals in record time, even defeating the mighty Athens, establishing Spartan control by the end of the 5th century BC. But what made them so successful was not just their guts and grit. The Spartan army was infantry-based and fought using the phalanx formation, where they stood shoulder to shoulder in a block formation, armed with spears, short swords, and shields. During the battle, the opposing army would try to fight through the line of Spartan warriors, but the Spartans' constant strength training made them a force to be reckoned with. And while spears and swords were important, the shields played a significant role. During this golden age of warfare, Spartan shields were extremely vital. They were said to protect not just the individual, but the entire army. Any warrior who lost their shield was severely punished. It was better for them if they just did not return home. And while many films show Spartans going into battle with bare chests, in reality, they wore full body armor. While their armor was impressive, their main weapon was even more so. The Spartans' main weapon was the dory spear, an impressive 7 to 9 feet long. It had a wooden handle, an iron spearhead, and a bronze butt spike for counterbalance. The butt spike, also known as a lizard killer, served two purposes: to stand up the spear and to be used as a secondary weapon if the spear broke. It was also commonly used to jab their fallen enemies as they marched past them, as an extra little show of superiority as they paraded off the battlefield. But was there ever a battle the Spartans didn't win? Although Spartan warriors were expected to perish before surrendering, they actually did surrender after one particularly disastrous fight, the Battle of Pylos. During this exceptionally bloody battle, many Spartans were taken hostage by the Athenians, ultimately leading to their admission of defeat. This event shook the ancient world, as it was commonly believed that Spartans would never surrender. One particular battle highlighted the heroism, endurance, and sacrifice of the 300 Spartans who perished holding off hundreds of thousands of Persians. This famous Battle of Thermopylae, which was depicted in the film 300, came to define the struggles of the Greek city-states in their wars against the vast Persian Empire and its king Xerxes. Sparta was defeated in this battle, but it was an impressive defeat. However, the movie 300 wasn't entirely accurate. Contrary to what 300 depicts, King Leonidas wasn't a man in his prime. In reality, he was an aging man during the Battle of Thermopylae in his late 50s, possibly even as old as 60. Still, he maintained a strong stance throughout the war, easily instilling fear into his enemies, including one king who had already conquered most of southern Greece. King Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, conquered most of southern Greece before sending a hostile message to Sparta. The message read, "You are advised to submit without further delay, for if I bring my army into your land, I will destroy your farms, slay your people, and raze your city." The Spartans' response was legendary. They replied to King Philip II's heinous threat with one single word: if. Suffice it to say, King Philip II did not attack Sparta. And while Spartan kings were ruthless, their queens are worth a mention too. Queen Gorgo was the wife of Spartan King Leonidas. She was fierce and smart, taking full advantage of her freedom to gain an education. She often gave advice to her male relatives, and once assisted the Spartan warriors in decoding a secret message. When a foreign woman asked Gorgo why Spartan women were the only ones who could rule men, Gorgo replied quickly, "Because we are the only women who are mothers of men," meaning only Spartan women give birth to real men. Speaking of being a Spartan mother, when a woman was pregnant, she was required to perform exercises to ensure her baby would be born strong. When a baby was born, it was taken to the town elders and checked for physical deformities and mental abnormalities. If anything was deemed wrong with the infant, what they did to it was disturbing. Any baby deemed unhealthy was tossed off a cliff into a large hole where it was left to starve. But a healthy appearance wasn't the only thing under scrutiny. After the elders had performed this initial inspection on the baby, it was brought back home where the mother would then perform another bizarre test. She would wash it in wine as a test for epilepsy. If the baby cried during this test, it meant it was epileptic and therefore not worth raising. Sadly, it is estimated that about half of all babies born in Sparta died as a result of these rituals. While Sparta may have won many battles, Sparta was never able to regain its military superiority after the Battle of Leuctra and was finally absorbed by the Achaean League in the 2nd century BC. But with centuries of wins under their belt, the Spartans have gone down in history as exceptional warriors, known for their fearlessness and formidable force, a reputation that still holds strong today. That wraps up this journey. Thanks for watching Splash Travels. Like and subscribe to uncover more of the world's best kept secrets, and don't forget to dive into even more fascinating facts on our main page, Factinate.